David had been counting down the days. After 12 long years fighting in space wars, he was finally going home. His uniform was covered with medals, but his heart was covered with scars. The battles he had fought were not just against enemy ships, but against nightmares that visited him every night. The recruitment office had promised him something special when he signed up all those years ago. They said when his service ended, he would get a companion animal as part of his benefits, something to keep him company and help him feel normal again. David had dreamed about this moment for months, maybe a dog like the ones he remembered from his childhood, or one of those gentle creatures from the farming planets. His small apartment felt too quiet after years of military noise. The walls were thin, and every little sound made him jump. He had been living alone for 3 weeks now, and the silence was driving him crazy. When the delivery notice finally came, David felt like a kid on his birthday. The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday morning when the transport truck pulled up outside his building. The delivery workers struggled to carry a huge metal container up the stairs. It was much bigger than David expected. He thought a pet carrier would be small, maybe the size of a suitcase. This thing looked like it could hold a motorcycle. Heavy. "Load today," said the first delivery guy, breathing hard. "You sure you ordered this?" David showed them his military benefit papers. The workers looked nervous and kept checking their watches. They seemed in a hurry to leave. "Just sign here and here," said the second worker, holding out a digital pad. "Biometric scan too, for security." David pressed his thumb to the scanner and watched the workers practically run back to their truck. Something felt wrong, but he was too excited to care. After all these years, his companion had finally arrived. The container sat in his living room like a silver monument. There were air holes along the sides and a complex-looking lock system. David could hear something moving inside, very quietly. His heart started beating faster. What kind of animal was in there? He found the release button and pressed it. The container hissed as it opened, releasing a cloud of cold air that smelled strange, like metal and something else he could not identify. David stepped back and waited for his new pet to come out. What he saw made his blood freeze. A young woman was curled up in the corner of the container, pressed against the back wall like she was trying to disappear. Her skin was so pale it almost glowed, and her hair was white as snow. But it was her eyes that made David's hands shake. They were purple, bright purple, and filled with terror. When she looked up at him, David saw her teeth. 2 of them were longer than the others, pointed like fangs. She was wearing torn clothes that looked like they came from some kind of ceremony, with strange symbols stitched in silver thread. The woman started speaking in a language David had never heard before. Her voice was soft but desperate, like she was begging for something. She kept pointing at herself and then at him, shaking her head over and over. David's mind was racing. This was not a pet. This was a person, a scared, confused person who had been shipped to him like cargo. He grabbed the shipping papers with shaking hands and read them again, more carefully this time. The species classification made his stomach drop. Instead of domesticated animal, herbivore like he expected. It read Sanguinaria nocturnalis, refugee transport. Someone had made a terrible mistake. Instead of getting a pet, the military had sent him a refugee from some alien world. David had heard stories about the sanguinarians during his military service. They were the ones who needed to drink blood to survive, though most soldiers just called them space vampires. Their home planet had been destroyed by mining companies, and now they were scattered across the galaxy looking for new places to live. The woman in his living room was not dangerous. She was terrified. She kept looking toward the door like she expected someone to come and hurt her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold onto the blanket someone had given her. David tried to speak to her in the few alien languages he knew, but nothing worked. She just stared at him with those purple eyes, waiting to see what he would do. He realized she probably thought he was going to hurt her or send her away. The smart thing would be to call the military and report the mistake. Let them figure out where she was supposed to go. But David had seen enough military bureaucracy to know what would happen. She would sit in some holding facility for months, while officials passed her case from desk to desk, and from the look of her, she did not have months to spare. David made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He slowly walked to his kitchen and came back with a glass of water and some bread. He set them down near the container and backed away, showing her with gestures that the food was for her. The woman looked at the offering and then back at David. For the first time since the container opened, she did not look terrified. She looked confused, like she could not understand why the strange human was being kind to her. David pointed to himself and said David slowly. Then he pointed to her and waited. After a long moment, she touched her chest and said something. That sounded like Vera. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was the first real communication they had managed. David smiled and nodded. Vera, he repeated, and saw something change in her expression. Maybe it was hope. As the sun went down and his apartment grew dark, David realized his quiet life had just become very complicated. He had signed up for a pet, but the universe had given him something much more challenging. He had a refugee alien, vampire woman sitting in his living room, and absolutely no idea what to do next. But for the first time since coming home from the war, David did not feel alone. The silence that had been driving him crazy was broken, and maybe, just maybe, they could help each other figure out how to survive in this strange new situation. The military had promised him a companion, and in the most unexpected way possible. That is exactly what he had received. The first 3 days were like living with a ghost. Vera would not leave the small storage room where David had set up a bed for her. She only came out when she thought he was sleeping, and even then, she moved so quietly that he barely heard her footsteps. David tried everything he could think of to make her feel safe. He left food outside her door and spoke to her gently through the wall. Sometimes he would hear her crying softly, and it broke his heart. This woman had lost everything, her home, her family, her entire world, and now she was stuck with a stranger who could not even speak her language. On the 4th morning, David's personal computer finally managed to translate some of her words. Her name was not exactly Vera, but something that sounded like Veraleth in her language. It meant morning star on her home planet. David thought it was a beautiful name for someone who seemed so lost in the darkness. The translation program also gave him some basic information about her people. The Sanguinarians had lived on a planet called Crimson Vale for thousands of years. They were not fighters or conquerors like some alien species David had encountered during the war. They were healers, teachers, and artists. Their society was built around helping others and sharing knowledge. But 6 months ago, a huge mining company had decided they wanted the rare crystals buried under Crimson Vale. The company had contracts with the galactic government, so they had the legal right to take the planet. The Sanguinarians were given 30 days to evacuate their homes and find somewhere else to live. Most of them ended up in refugee camps on distant moons, waiting for someone to give them a new home. Some, like Veraleth, had been shipped to different planets as part of resettlement programs. But the programs were overwhelmed, and many refugees were getting lost in the system. David started to understand why Veraleth was so scared. She had probably been bounced from place to place for months, never knowing where she would end up next. And now she had been delivered to a former soldier, someone from the same military. That had allowed her planet to be destroyed. The breakthrough came on day 5. When David heard a strange sound from the kitchen at 3 in the morning, he found Veraleth standing by the sink, staring at the leaking faucet with intense concentration. Her hands were glowing with a soft blue light, and as David watched in amazement, the leak stopped completely. Veraleth turned around and saw him watching. Instead of running away like she usually did, she pointed to the faucet and then to her hands. She was trying to show him that she could help. "Thank you," David said softly, pointing to the fixed faucet. That was very kind, for the first time since she arrived. Veraleth smiled. It was a tiny smile, but it changed her whole face. David realized she was not just scared, she was bored and frustrated. She wanted to be useful instead of hiding in a storage room all day. The next night, David left some broken electronics outside her door. An old radio, a lamp that would not turn on, and a tablet with a cracked screen. When he woke up the next morning, everything was working perfectly. Verileth had spent the night fixing them with her strange abilities, but David was starting to worry about something else. Verileth was getting thinner every day. The simple food he had been leaving for her was not enough. According to the information on his computer, sanguinarians needed something very specific to survive: fresh blood from other creatures. The idea made David uncomfortable at first. He had grown up watching movies where vampires were monsters who hurt people, but the more he learned about Verileth's people, the more he realized they were nothing like those stories. They did not hurt anyone to get what they needed. On their home planet, they had partnerships with animals who freely shared their life force in exchange for healing and protection. David knew he had to do something soon, or Verileth would become seriously sick. He spent hours researching where he could get safe blood supplies. Finally, he found a medical clinic on the other side of the city that sold expired blood products to research facilities. The doctor at the clinic looked at David strangely when he explained what he needed. "You know that stuff is not for drinking, right?" she asked. "It is only good for medical experiments now." David had to make up a story about a research project he was working on. He paid 300 credits, almost his entire monthly budget, for a small cooler full of blood bags that were past their expiration date for human use, but still safe for sanguinarians. When he brought the cooler home, Verileth was waiting in the living room. Somehow, she had sensed what he was carrying. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw the blood bags, and she grabbed David's hands and spoke rapidly in her own language. The computer translated her words. "You would do this for me, even though I am nothing to you?" David felt his own eyes getting wet. "You are not nothing," he said, hoping the computer would translate correctly. "You are my friend." That night, Verileth drank one of the blood bags, and David could see the color returning to her pale cheeks almost immediately. She became more energetic and started exploring the apartment. Instead of hiding in the storage room, she also started helping David in ways he had not expected. Her enhanced senses could detect problems that he completely missed. She fixed the heating system before it broke down completely, found a small gas leak that could have been dangerous, and even warned him when their elderly neighbor was having chest pains. David realized that taking care of Verileth was helping him too. For months after returning from the war, he had felt useless and alone. Now he had a purpose again. He was protecting someone who needed him, and she was making his life better in return. But their peaceful routine was about to be interrupted. One morning, David found an official notice taped to his door. The building manager wanted to see him. Immediately, someone had been asking questions about the strange woman living in his apartment. David's stomach dropped as he read the notice. Their little world was about to get much more complicated. The building manager's office smelled like old coffee and disappointment. David sat across from Mr. Peterson, trying to stay calm while the older man shuffled through a stack of complaint forms. "Look, David, I like you," Peterson said, not looking up from his papers. "You pay your rent on time. You don't cause trouble. But I've got 3 different tenants asking about the pale woman they see coming and going from your place at odd hours." David felt his heart racing. "She's a friend who's staying with me temporarily. There's nothing in my lease that says I can't have guests." Peterson finally looked up, his eyes tired. "It's not about guests, son. It's about the fact that she only comes out at night, never talks to anyone." And Mrs. Chen from 4B swears she saw her eyes glowing in the hallway. "Mrs. Chen needs new glasses," David said, trying to sound casual. "Verileth is just shy. She's been through some tough times." "Verileth," Peterson raised an eyebrow. "That's not a local name." "Look, I don't care where people come from, but I need to know if she's documented. Immigration services have been cracking down lately, and I can't afford problems with the authorities." David left the meeting with a promise to provide Verileth's documentation within a week. The problem was, he had no idea if she had any legal papers at all. Most refugees arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs. When he got home, he found Verileth in the kitchen, teaching herself to cook human food by watching video tutorials on his tablet. She had been trying to surprise him with dinner, but the results were questionable at best. "We need to talk," David said gently, showing her the translation device. He explained about the building manager and the complaints from neighbors. Verleth's face fell as she listened. "I should leave," the translator converted her words. "I'm bringing you trouble." This was always going to happen. "No," David said firmly. "We'll figure this out together. But first, I need to understand more about your people and your situation." That evening, they sat together on the couch while Verleth told her story. Through the translator, David learned that she had been a healer on Crimson Vale, someone who used her people's natural abilities to help others. She could sense illness before it showed symptoms, accelerate healing, and even ease emotional pain. "On my world, we lived in harmony with other species," she explained. "We gave healing. They gave us what we needed to survive. It was fair exchange, not taking." David was fascinated. "Can you sense things about me? Like medical things?" Verleth hesitated, then nodded. "You have old injuries that never healed properly. Your left shoulder, your ribs, and here," she touched her own chest, "your heart carries heavy sadness from the war." She was right about everything. David's shoulder ached every morning from an old shrapnel wound, and his ribs had been broken in a ship crash 3 years ago. As for his heart, well, that was harder to explain. But she somehow understood the weight he carried. "Could you help with that?" he asked. "The pain. I mean, the physical pain." Verleth looked uncertain. "I could try. But my people believe. Healing is sacred. It creates a bond between healer and patient. We do not do it lightly." David thought about this. What kind of bond? A trust, responsibility, care for each other's well-being. In my culture, once someone heals you, you become connected. Like family, but chosen family. That night, Verleth placed her glowing hands on David's shoulder, and for the first time in years, the constant ache disappeared. The relief was so intense that David almost cried. But more than that, he felt something else, a sense of peace he had not experienced since before the war. "The nightmares," he said in wonder, "they're quieter. How did you do that?" "Emotional wounds and physical wounds are connected," Verleth explained. "Healing one often helps the other. But David, this means we are bonded now, in my culture. This is very serious." David understood. She was not just his house guest anymore. According to her people's customs, they were now responsible for each other's well-being. It was a commitment he had not expected, but one that felt right. Their new relationship was tested when David's neighbor Jack knocked on the door the next evening. Jack was a friendly guy who worked at the spaceport, but he had been drinking and was feeling talkative. "Hey David, who's your mysterious friend?" Jack asked, trying to peer past him into the apartment. "Some of the folks are saying she might be one of those blood drinker aliens. You know we can't be too careful these days." David felt his temper rising. "She's a refugee who's been through hell, Jack. She's not dangerous to anyone." "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble," Jack said, holding up his hands. "But people are nervous. There's been talk about aliens taking jobs from locals, and with the economy the way it is, Verleth isn't taking anyone's job," David said firmly. "She's just trying to survive." After Jack left, David found Verleth sitting by the window, looking out at the city lights. She had heard the entire conversation. "They are afraid of me," she said sadly. "This always happens. People fear what they do not understand." "Some people are afraid," David corrected, "but not everyone. And not me." Verleth turned to look at him. "Why are you not afraid? You were a soldier. You fought against aliens in the war." David thought about this carefully. "I fought against armies that wanted to hurt people. You're not an army. You're just a person trying to live her life. And you've been nothing but kind to me." The next morning brought new challenges. David's attempts to get proper documentation for Verleth led him through a maze of government offices, each one passing him to someone else. The refugee services were overwhelmed, understaffed, and months behind on processing new cases. "Best we can do is put her on the waiting list," said a tired clerk at the immigration office. "Current wait time is about 18 months for a hearing." 18 months. David couldn't hide his shock. What is she supposed to do until then? The clerk shrugged. Stay out of trouble. Don't work without permits. Hope for the best. David left the office feeling frustrated and angry. The system was failing people like Verileth, leaving them in limbo while bureaucrats shuffled papers. Meanwhile, his neighbors were growing more suspicious, and the building manager was demanding answers he could not provide. That evening, as he watched Verileth carefully tending to the plants on his windowsill, another way she was trying to help, David realized he was facing a choice. He could try to navigate the broken system and hope for the best, or he could find another way to protect the person who had become so important to him. The answer came to him as he watched her gentle hands coax new growth from a dying fern. Sometimes, the best solutions were the ones that seemed impossible at first glance. The first sign of real trouble came on a Thursday morning when David found spray-painted words on the building's front wall. Someone had written nitrogen monoxide aliens in red letters, right next to the main entrance where everyone would see it. David's blood ran cold as he stared at the hateful message. He knew this was meant for Verileth, even though most people in the building did not even know she existed. Word was spreading somehow, and not in a good way. Peterson was already outside with a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing at the paint. This is exactly what I was worried about, he said when he saw David. I've got corporate breathing down my neck about property values, and now this. I need those papers for your friend, David, today. David's stomach twisted. He still had no documentation for Verileth, and the government offices kept giving him the runaround. I'm working on it, Mr. Peterson. Just give me a little more time. Time is what I don't have, Peterson replied, scrubbing harder at the stubborn paint. I've got other tenants threatening to move out. Mrs. Rodriguez says she's scared to walk the halls at night. Whether that's fair or not doesn't matter. Scared tenants don't pay rent. That evening, David tried to explain the situation to Verileth without frightening her too much. But she was smarter than he gave her credit for, and she could see the worry in his eyes. It is getting worse, isn't it? She asked through the translator. The fear, the anger. I can feel it in the air when I go out at night. David nodded reluctantly. Some people are scared because they don't understand, but most of them would be fine if they actually met you. Verileth smiled sadly. You are kind to believe that, but I have seen this before. On other worlds where my people tried to find homes. Fear spreads faster than understanding. The situation escalated the next week when David came home from work to find a small crowd gathered outside the building. About 15 people were holding signs with messages like "Protect our families" and "Humans first." They were not violent or loud, but their presence sent a clear message. A woman with short gray hair approached David as he tried to get to the entrance. Excuse me, do you live here? Yes, David said carefully. I'm Linda Walsh from the neighborhood safety committee. We're concerned about reports of unregistered aliens living in this building. Have you seen anything suspicious? David felt trapped. If he lied and they found out later, it would make things worse. If he told the truth, he would be putting Verileth in immediate danger. I haven't seen anything that would threaten anyone's safety, he said finally. It was technically true, even if it was not the whole truth. Linda studied his face. Well, if you do notice anything unusual, please contact us immediately. We're just trying to keep our community safe. As David climbed the stairs to his apartment, he could hear the protesters talking among themselves about the pale woman and strange lights that neighbors had reported. Someone had been watching very carefully and sharing information. Inside his apartment, David found Verileth packing her few belongings into a small bag. She had heard the commotion outside and understood what it meant. I have to leave tonight, she said quietly. Before this gets worse for you? No, David said firmly. We're not giving up that easily. There has to be another way. What other way? Verileth asked, her purple eyes filled with sadness. The government will not help me for months, if at all. Your neighbors want me gone. Your building manager is losing patience. I am causing you nothing but problems. David sat down next to her on the couch. You're also the reason I sleep through the night without nightmares. You're the reason my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. You fixed half the things in this apartment and probably saved Mrs. Patterson's life when you detected her heart problems before anyone else noticed. That doesn't matter to them, Verleth said. They only see the differences, the pale skin, the strange teeth, the need for things they find disgusting. David was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then an idea began to form in his mind. Crazy, risky, but possibly their only option. What if we made it legal? He said slowly. What if we found a way to make your presence here completely legitimate, so no one could force you to leave? Verleth looked confused. How will we do that? I have no papers, no official status. Marriage. David said, the word coming out before he had fully thought it through. Interspecies civil unions are legal in this colony. If we got married, you would automatically become a permanent resident. Verleth stared at him in shock. You would do that? Marry someone you barely know, just to keep me safe? David realized he had been thinking about this possibility for weeks without admitting it to himself. I know you better than you think. I know you're kind, brave, and selfless. I know you care about helping others, even when they don't appreciate it. I know you've saved my life in more ways than one. But marriages. Verleth struggled to find the right words. It is a commitment. A promise to share your life with someone. We have only known each other for a few months in my culture. People sometimes marry for practical reasons and learn to love each other later, David explained. But honestly, I don't think that would be a problem for us. Verleth was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she spoke. In my culture, the bond we already share, healer and healed, protector and protected, is considered one of the most sacred relationships possible. Marriage would simply be making official what already exists between us. Before David could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Through the peephole, he could see two people in official uniforms, immigration enforcement officers. David Chen? One of them called. We need to speak with you about reports of an undocumented alien resident at this address. David looked at Verleth, who had gone completely pale. They were out of time. The decision had been made for them. Hide in the storage room, he whispered urgently. Don't come out no matter what you hear. As Verleth disappeared into the back room, David took a deep breath and opened the door. The next few minutes would determine both their futures. Good evening, officers, he said, trying to sound calm. How can I help you? The taller officer consulted his tablet. We've received multiple reports about a sanguinarian female living at this address without proper documentation. We need to conduct a search of these premises. David's heart was pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. Everything he and Verleth had built together was about to come crashing down. Unless he could think of something fast, of course. He said, stepping aside. But I should mention that you need to coordinate with the civil union office. My fiancé and I filed our marriage application this morning. It was a complete lie, but it was the only chance they had. The immigration officer looked at David with suspicion. Marriage application? We have no record of any filing from this address. David's mind raced. He had just told the biggest lie of his life, and now he had to make it believable. We filed it this morning at the downtown office. The paperwork probably hasn't been processed yet. The second officer, a woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. Sir, we understand this might be inconvenient, but we still need to conduct our search. Reports of undocumented residents are taken very seriously. Of course, David said, his mouth dry. But I should warn you, my fiancée is very shy around strangers. She's been through some difficult experiences. As the officers began looking through his apartment, David prayed that Verleth would stay hidden. They checked the bedroom, the bathroom, and the kitchen. David's heart nearly stopped when they approached the storage room door. What's in here? The tall officer asked, reaching for the handle. Just old military equipment and storage boxes. David said quickly, nothing interesting. The officer opened the door and shined his flashlight into the dark room. David held his breath, knowing that Verleth was somewhere in there among the boxes and old furniture. After what felt like forever, the officer closed the door. Looks clear. The female officer was studying her tablet. Mr. Chen, We do show that you're a registered veteran with housing benefits. Your record is clean. But we need to verify this marriage claim. David nodded, trying to look confident. What do you need from me? You need to report to the civil union office first thing Monday morning with your fiancé and complete the proper paperwork. If everything checks out, this matter will be closed after the officers left. David waited 5 minutes before calling for Verleth. She emerged from behind a stack of old boxes, covered in dust but unharmed. They're gone, David said, pulling her into a relieved hug. But we have a problem. I told them we were getting married, and now we actually have to do it. Verleth looked at him seriously. Are you sure about this? Once we take this step, there is no going back. In my culture, marriage bonds are permanent. David had been thinking about this question for weeks without realizing it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've become the most important person in my world, Verleth. I want to protect you, not just from immigration officers, but from everything. That weekend, they prepared for their new life together. David researched interspecies marriage laws while Verleth used her skills. To make their apartment feel more like a real home, she fixed the broken heater, repaired the damaged walls, and even managed to make the old furniture look almost new. Monday morning arrived faster than either of them expected. They dressed carefully for their visit to the civil union office. David in his best civilian clothes, Verleth in a simple but elegant dress they had bought the day before. The clerk at the civil union office was a middle-aged man named Robert, who had clearly seen many unusual couples over the years. He barely blinked when he saw Verleth's pale skin and purple eyes. First interspecies marriage? He asked kindly. Yes, David answered. Is that a problem? Not at all. We do about 20 of these a year. The paperwork is a bit more complex, but the important parts are the same. Robert smiled at Verleth. Do you have your immigration documents, miss? David's heart sank. This was the moment he had been dreading. She's a refugee. Her paperwork is still being processed. Robert frowned slightly. That does complicate things. Normally, we require valid documentation from both parties. But there are emergency provisions, aren't there? David asked desperately. For refugees in danger, Robert consulted his computer. For several minutes, there is something called a humanitarian exception. If the refugee is in immediate danger of deportation, we can expedite the process. Do you have proof of that? David pulled out the immigration enforcement report from their apartment visit. Will this work? After reading the document carefully, Robert nodded. Yes, this qualifies. We can proceed with the emergency filing. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Robert read the standard vows while David and Verleth stood together, holding hands. When it came time to exchange personal promises, David spoke first. I promise to protect you, to stand by you, and to help you build a new life here, he said. Looking into Verleth's purple eyes, you saved me from my darkness. Now let me help you find your light. Verleth's voice was soft but clear. I promise to heal you when you are hurt, to support you when you are weak, and to share my life with you completely. You gave me hope when I had nothing. Now we have everything together. Robert pronounced them married and handed them their official certificate. Congratulations. Mrs. Chen, you are now a permanent resident of the colony, walking home as a married couple felt surreal. David kept looking at their joined hands, amazed at how right it felt. Verleth seemed more relaxed than he had ever seen her, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But their biggest surprise came when they arrived at their apartment building. Instead of angry protesters, they found Mrs. Patterson from the fourth floor waiting for them with a small gift basket. I heard you two got married today, she said with a warm smile. I wanted to thank your wife for whatever she did to help with my heart problems last month. The doctors say I'm doing much better. Over the following weeks, more neighbors began approaching them. It turned out that Verleth's late-night repairs and early warnings about building problems had helped many people, even though they had not realized who was responsible. Mr. Peterson stopped worrying about complaints and started asking Verleth for advice about building maintenance. Her ability to sense problems before they became serious was saving him thousands of credits in repair costs. David found work at a local veterans center, helping other former soldiers adjust to civilian life. His own healing, aided by Veroleth's abilities, made him uniquely qualified to understand what others were going through. Veroleth started volunteering at the colony's medical clinic, working with doctors who were fascinated by her diagnostic abilities. She could not practice medicine officially without proper credentials, but her insights helped save several lives. Their marriage, which had started as a desperate solution to an immediate problem, grew into something neither of them had expected. They discovered they enjoyed each other's company, shared similar values, and complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. 6 months after their wedding, David woke up one morning and realized he could not imagine his life without Veroleth. She was no longer the frightened refugee who had been delivered to him by mistake. She was his partner, his best friend, and the love of his life. As he watched her tend to the garden she had created on their balcony, David reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. The military had promised him a pet to ease his loneliness. Instead, they had given him something infinitely better, a companion who had chosen to stay with him, not out of obligation, but out of love. The paperwork still listed the original delivery as completed successfully. In a way, David thought with a smile, they were absolutely right.